She wasn't just my friend's mom, she was a woman who saw straight through me. The way she smirked, the way her eyes lingered, it was like she knew a part of me I hadn't even discovered yet. I thought I was visiting a friend, but I was stepping into something I could never forget. I still remember the first time I really noticed her. Of course, I had seen her before. She was my friend's mom, always around the edges of our plans. She'd wave from the kitchen window when I came over, or call out a reminder for him to be back before dinner. Just background details, until that day. The afternoon sun was spilling through the living room windows when I walked in, setting the whole house aglow in a warm, golden haze. I was expecting the usual chaos, my friends sprawled on the couch, video game controllers scattered around, maybe the faint smell of pizza rolls in the oven. But instead, I found her standing there. She wasn't dressed to impress, just a simple blouse tucked into jeans, her hair loosely pinned back, yet she had this kind of presence that instantly made the room feel smaller, like everything else faded when she was in it. She looked up from the book she was holding, and that smirk tugged at her lips. "You look so innocent," she said, her voice carrying a playful edge, almost like a private joke. Then she tilted her head ever so slightly, eyes narrowing with amusement. "I'll fix that." I froze for a second, not sure if I was supposed to laugh or blush or just stand there dumbly, because that's exactly what I did. My heart thudded against my ribs like it wanted to escape, and I could feel a ridiculous heat climbing up the back of my neck. She chuckled softly at my reaction, the sound low and warm, like she'd seen this kind of nervousness before. Then, just as quickly as she'd stirred the air between us, she moved past me, brushing by so close I caught the faintest trace of her perfume. Something floral, something mature, not the sugary kind you catch in crowded hallways at school. It lingered long after she left the room. I remember telling myself it was nothing, just her sense of humor, just me overthinking like I always did. But the way she'd said it, the deliberate pause before that last line, it planted something in my mind I couldn't shake. Later, when my friend finally appeared, joking about our plans and pulling me toward the kitchen, I found myself distracted. She was there, pouring coffee, her movements unhurried, graceful in a way I didn't even know how to describe. She didn't look at me directly, but I felt her awareness, like she knew exactly how much space she took up in my thoughts. That was the moment the line shifted for me. She wasn't just my friend's mom anymore. She was a woman who carried herself with a quiet confidence, someone who seemed to see more than I was willing to admit. And for the first time, I caught myself wondering, what if her words weren't just a joke? What if she meant them? I didn't have the answer then. But deep down, I knew one thing: this wasn't going to be just another casual visit. The next few times I came over, I told myself I wouldn't overthink it. I'd convinced myself her little remark had been nothing more than playful banter, the kind of thing adults said without realizing how it might land. But the truth is, every time I stepped into that house, I was more aware of her than I'd ever been before. It started with small things. The way she moved around the kitchen, completely at ease in her own space, every gesture unhurried. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, but that confidence, that natural rhythm, it drew my eyes in ways I couldn't explain. She'd reach up to a high shelf, the fabric of her blouse shifting just enough to reveal the outline of her figure. Or she'd tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, her bracelet catching the light as it clinked softly against the countertop. And then there were the moments when our paths would cross directly. She'd hand me a plate, or pass me a mug of coffee. Her fingers would brush mine, so lightly it might have been accidental, but each time, a little spark shot through me, sharp and undeniable. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But then I started to notice her noticing me. The way her eyes lingered a second longer than they needed to. The way her smile would shift into something sly when she caught me staring. It wasn't dramatic, nothing anyone else would have picked up on. But in the silence between us, it felt loud. One afternoon, sunlight spilled across the dining table, making the whole room glow in a golden warmth. I sat there, pretending to scroll on my phone while my friend rummaged around upstairs. She was standing at the counter, stirring cream into her coffee, absent-mindedly tapping the spoon against the mug. She must have sensed me watching, because she glanced up. Our eyes met. It wasn't long, a second, maybe two, but in that moment, it felt like time stopped. Her gaze wasn't sharp or intimidating. It was knowing. Like she could see every thought I was trying so hard to hide. My chest tightened, and I quickly looked away, pretending to focus on something else. But she didn't. I could feel her eyes on me, steady and deliberate, until the sound of footsteps broke the spell. My friend barreled back into the room, talking about something I didn't quite catch, and she turned her attention back to her coffee as if nothing had happened. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. Every little detail, the steam rising from her mug, the faint clink of her ring against porcelain, the way her perfume drifted lightly through the air, etched itself into my memory. And somewhere inside me, a question I'd been trying to bury kept pushing forward. Was this all in my head, or was she quietly inviting me to notice her? It happened one evening, almost by accident. My friend had stepped out to grab something from the store, leaving me alone in the house. I wandered into the living room, intending to scroll on my phone until he got back, but instead, I found her there. She was sitting on the couch, a glass of wine balanced delicately in her hand, her legs crossed in a way that seemed casual yet poised. The lamp beside her cast a warm, amber glow across the room, softening every edge. She looked up when I entered, and for a moment, I almost turned around, as if I'd intruded on something private. "Don't look so startled," she said with a faint smile. "It's just me." I laughed nervously and sank into the armchair across from her. The silence stretched for a beat, heavy but not uncomfortable. Then she asked me about school. About what I wanted to do, where I saw myself in a few years. Her tone was different from the usual small talk adults make. There was genuine interest in her eyes, like she actually wanted to know. I found myself talking more than I expected, about the uncertainty of finishing my degree, the weight of trying to figure out my life. Things I didn't usually admit out loud. She listened intently, her gaze never leaving me. Every now and then she'd nod, or tilt her head thoughtfully, and it made me want to keep going. There was something grounding in the way she looked at me, as if my words mattered. When I paused, she leaned slightly forward, resting her elbow on the arm of the couch, her chin on her hand. "You remind me of myself when I was your age," she said softly. "So unsure, but with so much ahead of you." I felt a flutter in my chest at her words, not just because of what she said, but how she said it. There was warmth there, almost maternal, yet laced with something more personal, something I couldn't quite name. Then came the smallest gesture. She reached out, placing her hand lightly on my arm. Just a touch, fleeting and gentle. But it lingered in my skin long after she drew back. "You'll figure it out," she added, her voice lower now, almost a whisper. "Don't be so hard on yourself." I swallowed hard, nodding, though my thoughts were a mess. That simple touch had unraveled me. It wasn't just comfort. It wasn't just advice. It was something else. Something I wasn't ready to admit, even to myself. The sound of the front door opening broke the moment. My friend returned, calling out about traffic. She sat back quickly, her expression slipping into its usual composure. But when our eyes met across the room, there was a quiet flicker there, like we both knew something had shifted. That night, as I lay in bed replaying the conversation, one thought refused to leave me. She had seen me in a way no one else did. And I couldn't stop wondering what that meant. It was the little things that started to change between us. The pauses that felt longer, the smiles that lingered after the words had already faded. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just my imagination feeding on scraps, but deep down, I knew something subtle had shifted. One evening proved it more than any other. We were in the living room, waiting for my friend to finish getting ready upstairs. I sat on the edge of the couch, absently scrolling through my phone, when she appeared from the kitchen. She carried a folded blanket in her arms, and with that same calm, assured presence, she walked over and placed it neatly on the armrest beside me. "You always look so serious," she teased, her voice playful. "What are you hiding behind that screen?" I chuckled awkwardly, locking my phone. "Just scrolling." Her lips curved into that familiar smirk, the one that seemed to know too much. She tilted her head, studying me. "Still so innocent," she murmured, her tone lower this time, almost conspiratorial. "You really have no idea, do you?" My throat tightened. "No idea about what?" I managed, though my voice cracked slightly. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer, her hand reaching toward my shirt. For a second, my breath caught, but she only brushed her fingers against the fabric, plucking off something small, a speck of lint, maybe. It should have been nothing. But her touch lingered, warm against my chest for a second too long, before she finally drew her hand away. "There," she said lightly, as if nothing had happened. But her eyes stayed locked on mine, daring me to interpret it any other way. I laughed nervously, unsure of what to say. My heart was pounding so hard it drowned out the ticking of the clock on the wall. The silence between us grew heavy, stretched taut like a string pulled to its breaking point. Then, as if sensing my unease, she smiled gently and stepped back. "Relax," she said, her voice softer now, though no less charged. "I'm just teasing." But the way she looked at me, steady, unflinching, with that flicker of amusement dancing at the edges of her gaze, told me there was more to it than just teasing. My friend's footsteps thundered down the stairs a moment later, breaking the tension. She turned casually toward the noise, her posture slipping back into its usual ease. But for me, everything felt different. I replayed that moment in my mind over and over. The way her hand had lingered, the deliberate tone in her voice, the smirk that seemed to test me. She was pushing at the edges of something, gauging how far I might go, or maybe how far she wanted to go herself. That night, lying awake, I realized I'd crossed into dangerous territory. This wasn't just harmless banter anymore. This was something else. Something neither of us had spoken aloud, but both of us clearly felt. It was a small thing that shifted everything, almost too small to notice at first. My friend had gone out for the evening, leaving me behind to wait until he returned. I found myself in the kitchen, pouring a glass of water, when I heard the sharp sound of something breaking. I hurried into the living room and saw her crouched on the floor, picking up the pieces of a shattered mug. Her hand trembled slightly as she gathered the shards into her palm. It was the first time I'd seen her look unsettled. "Are you okay?" I asked, stepping closer. She gave a short laugh, one that didn't quite mask the frustration in her eyes. "I'm fine. Just clumsy." But the way she exhaled, long and weary, told me it wasn't about the mug at all. Without thinking, I knelt beside her. "Here, let me help." Our hands moved close as we reached for the broken pieces, our fingers brushing against one another. She froze, then slowly withdrew, letting me take over. When I glanced up, I saw something raw flicker across her face, not the confident, teasing expression I'd grown used to, but something softer. Something tired. "Long day?" I asked quietly, setting the last shard on the table. Her eyes lingered on the broken mug for a moment before she sat back on the couch, shoulders sagging. "Long few years, if I'm being honest," she murmured. I hesitated, unsure if I should sit beside her. But something in her expression, that mix of strength and fragility, pulled me closer. I lowered myself onto the cushion next to her, leaving a careful space, waiting for her to continue. "You spend your whole life taking care of people," she said slowly, her gaze fixed on the window. "Your husband, your kids, your home. You put all of yourself into it. And then one day, you look up and realize, no one's really taking care of you." Her voice cracked just slightly on that last word. She turned her head, almost embarrassed by her own confession, but I didn't look away. I reached out instinctively, placing my hand over hers. The gesture was simple, but it carried a weight I didn't expect. Her skin was warm, her fingers tense at first, then, gradually, they relaxed, curling around mine. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't empty, it was full, heavy with the honesty she'd just shared and the quiet promise in the way I held her hand. When she finally looked at me, her eyes were softer than I'd ever seen them. Vulnerable. Grateful. Something unspoken passed between us in that look, something deeper than teasing remarks or playful smirks. She gave my hand a gentle squeeze before pulling away, straightening her posture as if to rebuild the wall she'd let slip. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice steadier now. I nodded, my chest tight, knowing I'd just glimpsed the real her, the side she kept hidden from everyone else. And that glimpse changed everything. It was late, later than I'd planned to stay. My friend had dozed off upstairs, leaving the house quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of a clock on the wall. I sat in the living room, half considering sneaking out to avoid overstaying, when I heard the gentle creak of footsteps behind me. She appeared in the doorway, a faint smile tugging at her lips. The warm glow from the lamp lit her features in soft amber, casting shadows that made her look almost unreal, timeless. She held a glass of water, her fingers delicate against the rim, and for a moment, she just stood there, watching me. "You're still here," she said softly, her voice carrying the kind of warmth that felt more like a statement than a question. I nodded, suddenly aware of how small the room felt with just the two of us in it. "Yeah." I lost track of time. She crossed the room, her steps slow and unhurried, and lowered herself onto the couch beside me. Not across the room this time, not on the other side of the space, but close. Close enough that the faint scent of her perfume reached me, subtle and comforting. For a while, we just sat in silence. She sipped from her glass, her gaze fixed on nothing in particular. I found myself studying her profile, the curve of her jaw, the way a strand of hair slipped loose and brushed against her cheek. Then, she turned her head and caught me looking. That smirk, the one I'd come to know so well, curved across her lips. But this time, it was softer, less teasing, more deliberate. "You really are innocent," she whispered, her tone edged with something playful but also weighted, almost daring. Her eyes searched mine, steady and unflinching. "Someone should fix that." The words hung between us, heavy and charged. My breath caught, and I didn't know whether to laugh or answer, or just stay completely still. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain she could hear it. She leaned closer, just slightly, as if testing the air between us. Her hand lifted, slow and hesitant, until her fingertips brushed against my cheek. The touch was light, almost nothing, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I froze, torn between instinct and caution. The house was silent, the world outside dark, and in that moment, it felt like there was only her, only me, and the possibility neither of us had dared to name. Her thumb traced a gentle line across my cheekbone before her hand fell back into her lap. She sighed softly, almost wistfully, her gaze dropping for the first time that night. "Life gets complicated," she murmured, as if reminding herself more than me. But then her eyes lifted again, locking with mine, and for a heartbeat, neither of us pulled away. The silence stretched, heavy and electric. Everything we'd been circling around was there, unspoken yet undeniable. And though nothing more happened in that moment, I knew we had crossed a line. The days that followed were heavier, though nothing had actually been said aloud. That late-night moment, the smirk, the brush of her hand against my cheek, lingered between us like smoke after a flame. Every time I came by, I felt it in the air, even when she was just moving through the kitchen or asking simple questions about my day. One afternoon, I found myself alone with her again. My friend had stepped out, leaving us in the living room. She sat in her usual place on the couch, her legs folded beneath her, while I hovered uncertainly near the window, pretending to admire the light spilling across the floorboards. "You've been quiet," she said, her voice soft but pointed. I turned, meeting her eyes. I don't know what to say anymore." Her lips curved into a faint smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. She set down the mug she was holding and patted the cushion beside her. Hesitant, I sat. The space between us felt charged, as it always did, but also fragile, like one wrong move could shatter everything. She looked at me for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke, her voice steadier than I expected. "I wasn't fair to you. I've been careless." The words surprised me, but the regret in her tone was unmistakable. "Careless?" I asked. She exhaled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "With my words. With the way I've looked at you. I've let things blur that shouldn't have." Her gaze softened. "You're a good man. Too good to be caught up in someone else's confusion." I didn't know what to say. My chest ached with the weight of her honesty, with the truth I'd been avoiding. Finally, I whispered, "It didn't feel like confusion." Her eyes flickered, searching mine, and for a moment the silence between us roared louder than any words. She reached out then, her hand resting gently over mine, her thumb brushing against my knuckles. The touch was tender, deliberate, a silent acknowledgement of everything we'd felt but never spoken. "You've reminded me," she said quietly, "that I'm still capable of being seen. Of being wanted." Her voice cracked just slightly, and she drew a breath to steady herself. "But wanting and having are not always the same." I swallowed hard, every part of me torn between reaching for her and respecting the truth she had just laid bare. Her fingers squeezed mine one last time before she let go. "What happened between us, it will stay here," she said gently. "But don't forget it. Let it remind you that you have so much ahead of you. More than I can give." There was no anger in her voice, no rejection, only a bittersweet acceptance. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. For a moment, we lingered there, the sunlight catching in her hair. She leaned in, pressing the softest kiss against my cheek. A goodbye, a thank you, and a promise all in one. As I walked away from that house, I knew we wouldn't speak of it again. But I also knew I would carry that connection with me, not as regret, but as proof that even the most fleeting bonds can leave us changed forever.